Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm joined by my co-host, Jen. Hey, Jen.
Hi, happy to be here today on this freezing cold day.
Oh, I know. But is it getting better? I think it's getting better, right?
It's getting better. And I know by the time we put this podcast out into the world, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it'll be spring. Or at least spring-like weather.
I don't think it's coming out that far from today. I think we're still talking February, so
I'm still keeping my fingers crossed for nice weather in February. It's been sub-zero here.
Okay. Well, with that, today we are joined by Kay Lewis, and Kay, I love her. She has almost 40 years of experience in claims, and she's just like a dynamic woman. When I talked to her on the phone before the podcast, I think we were on the phone for over an hour, just chatting. So, when I can talk to someone that long before the podcast, I'm like, we should have just pressed record now.
Absolutely.
But Kay's here to share, just her journey into claims, her progression through claims, and then what she's seen change over the years. Starting from when she came in, there was no email yet, and it was paper files, and things have just evolved so much since then. So I can't wait to have her come in and talk about it. So with that, let's bring her in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Meghan Henry.
Good morning, Kay. Welcome to Claims Never Sleep. So happy to have you. How are you today?
I am fantastic, and I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm excited. This is my first ever podcast.
Well, hopefully it will be an enjoyable and easy one. I think it will be. And so you're out in Indianapolis, right?
Yes.
Oh, is it so? Is it Jen this week? Jen's in the Scranton area, and her kids had virtual learning one day because it was so cold and no busing. Has it been that terrible out by you?
Yeah, we have had more snow than Chicago this year.
Really?
I think we're at 18 inches between the last two storms, and of course then we had the bitter cold, like 20 and 30 below wind chills this week. So
yeah.
I don't know. I don't feel sorry for the kids these days. I'm like, I remember we were out of school for one time on a snow day, the blizzard of 1978. Sorry, I'm aging myself. But it's like, oh no, we went to school. And I'm glad I'm not a parent now, though, that has to deal with the virtual learning and all that it entails and going through COVID. Because my boys will be 28 and 30 in March. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how parents did it.
It wasn't
the weather and virtual learning.
Yeah, it was challenging. But Jen and I always joke about it because I miss it. And Jen's like, how can you miss it? I'm like, I don't know. I kind of liked it when everyone was just home all the time. It felt very cozy to me. Yes. I didn't like the having to be a teacher. That was not a good thing for me. But I definitely miss how everything got really slowed down. I liked that.
And mine were already out of the house by then, unfortunately. So not much of a change for me. But I think that would have been a good upside to it is, you're kind of in your little bubble for a little bit and you don't get much of that these days.
No.
Okay, I have to tell you, my kid's big Christmas present this year is we're going to Indianapolis in June. We are going to see an Indiana Fever game.
Oh, I hope you picked a fireworks night. I was thinking the Indians, but so are they Caitlin Clark fans? Is that
they're
why?
Huge Caitlin Clark fans. So I took to see them play the New York Liberty in New York last year, and they loved it. But they said we really want to see Caitlin play at home because we want to be on the jumbotron. That's what they told me.
Oh, yes.
And they said no one's going to put a Fever jersey up on the jumbotron at the Liberty Stadium, which, fair point. But yes. We're all big Caitlin Clark or just WNBA fans in general.
Good.
And so, we're going to go out in June and we're going to see them, ironically, play the Liberty in Indiana. Brooklyn being 2 hours from my house. We're so excited. So they keep asking me all these questions about Indianapolis. And I was like, I have no idea. So I might have to pick your brain.
Reach out. Tips, especially downtown. Like if you're staying downtown, by the arena, There's a place, it's called Massachusetts Avenue. We call it Mass Avenue, but the food and little shops, I mean, you can park and just walk all up and down, and it's just a great day. And they have what's called the garage. It used to be the old Pepsi plant or Coke plant, and they converted the office areas into what's called, it's a hotel. So, and then the plant part, it's called the garage, and they have all kinds of, they have duck pin bowling, all kinds of food.
Oh,
Cool.
You know, there's a rooftop terrace to have cocktails, and it's pretty fun.
that sounds
good.
lovely. I never knew.
Megan might be joining me in Indianapolis in June.
Yeah, I know. She's going to be interested in the game. So, yeah.
Yes, and this is something that our listeners know, and Jen knows quite well. She will say things to me like, "Oh, are you watching the game tonight?" I was like, "What game are you talking about?" Like, I don't pay attention to these things.
Yes.
But I do delight in the fact when then Megan will text me, and because I asked her about, like, are you watching the national championship? She's like, well, who's in it? What's going on? And she's like, I was at the bus stop and I knew who was in the national championship. Thanks for telling me.
That is really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think, and especially boys, they do like girls who are interested in sports. So gives them something to do.
Yeah. So yeah, I know a lot of things, but staying on the cutting edge of sports is not one of them.
Me either, Megan. So,
but let's talk claims, because that's what we're here to talk
Yes.
about. So, you know, Kay, you and I talked a few weeks ago, and we just had a great conversation because you have been in this industry for almost 40 years, and that's what we wanted to talk about. You have so much to share because you've pretty much seen it all, and you've seen the evolution of the claims industry to where we are today. So but before we really dive into what you've seen change and what your experiences, like, how did you get into claims? Like, was this your idea? Like, were you like, you know, I really want to be a claims adjuster? Or were you like many of the other guests we have on here, and they're like, well, I was, you know, an English major, or I graduated, I had no idea what to do, and I went to a job fair and I started working at this insurance company.
Well, mine's an even kind of more interesting story because I didn't know what I wanted to do after high school. And I'm like, I'm going to put off college and, just see what I want to do. But of course, you have to work. So I applied for a receptionist job, not knowing the claims world. And it was at a claims office.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out as a receptionist, and I'd listen to the adjusters, take their recorded statements, make their phone calls. And I'm like, I could do that. As you can tell, I'm not shy about talking or putting myself out there. So it just sounded so interesting. So I completed, started taking, my manager said, well, you can take courses. So, at that time through the Insurance Institute, I completed my INS and then got my AIC. And, it's pretty amazing when we talked, when you think back on, where you started and all the steps that you've taken to get where you are now. It's the evolution of it is almost, it's fantastic.
Yeah. So you started taking the classes, and then so you evolved out of the administrative role into the claims role? Like, how did that go? Did you were like, okay, I've taken the classes, I've passed, I'm ready. Throw me in.
I did. It probably was only about a year and a half too.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of think back now and you think, gosh, it was more simple then, even though, at that time, everyone did everything. So you did work comp, you did property, you did, liability, slip and falls, auto. So, it was so well-rounded. And then you'd start to think, okay, I want to get into more difficult claims. And, as time progressed, you got the more challenging claims. And I think that's the one thing that I've always liked about being in claims is it changes. Sometimes your day changes every few minutes.
Yeah.
So it takes a certain personality to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And no offense to men, but I've always thought you see more female adjusters. And because I think in this industry, you need to have a feeling of compassion and understanding, nurturing. Men are more, I want to fix it. But in this industry, there's a lot of hand holding, as I'm sure, in what you do as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I had on, one guest I had on that prior to coming into Claims, she worked as a 911 dispatcher and operator. And I was like, what an amazing, like, groundwork for Claims, because it's similar, because you're working with people during a very dark time that they need your help, right? And you have to, listen and be compassionate and, not try to fix, but listen and help, and I found like that I never even thought about how like how good that is as a baseline into Claims.
Yes. Yeah, because you have to learn, learn to listen. It's the compassion, because it may, and being a 911 operator, how many calls do you take a day? But that sometimes when you step back and think, you know what, this is my 15th call for tonight, but it's their first. I may have done this type of claim 1,000 times, but it's their first. And you still need that compassion and taking the time to explain to them, the process and procedure.
Yes. So you kind of started being like the jack of all trades, right? Did you eventually kind of during the early parts of your career kind of move into a certain area, or were you handling all different things for a long time?
Yeah, we started out handling all different things for, quite a few years. Everybody was what we called multi-line adjusters. And then I think companies started to question, how is this working? I think we need people to be more specialized, because they thought it would bring, better outcomes to the claim rather than switching from this policy to this policy. So I think that was about the time I moved into more of a general liability focus, between GL and auto. And it's so funny, as I tell you, it's kind of how I fell into this career in the beginning. As it went on, I things just, I don't know, fell into place. So as I'm working in auto and GL for a long time, I was with, I don't even know if we can mention it. I was at an insurance company, and the claims trainer was going to run the litigation department. He's like, "Hey, we'd really like for you to become the claims trainer." So I took kids right out of college. We'd get a big group anywhere from 8 to 15. And they'd be with me for 28 weeks, 14 weeks in property and 14 weeks of casualty. So that kind of going back to your well-rounded, you've done everything. And then at the end of the training, they were placed wherever the company needed them. And I loved reading a policy. People are like, how do you do that? I find it interesting. I mean, because as attorneys, the details count. When you're looking at a policy, does it say and or? Because if it's and, it has to be both of these criteria, or. So it's funny to watch their minds open up and watch them figure out, gosh, I like liability and casualty better, or, some would turn and be more towards property. So, yeah. And then actually that company was bought out, and they wanted to do their training in Columbus, Ohio. And my kids were very young at the time, so I couldn't transplant. So I applied for a litigation position. I said, I'm ready to start handling a lot more complex claims. And the company reached out and they said, well, we filled that position internally. Would you be interested in field liability? And I'm like, yeah, count me in. So I spent a lot of time on the road. 3,000 to 4,000 miles a month. I had, if you cut Indiana in half, I had as far north as South Bend, Lawrenceburg, South, and Southwest Ohio. So those claims were a lot of slip and falls. You'd meet with people, meet on site, try and do on-site settlements, a lot of fatalities. So, going out doing diagrams, measurements, kind of an accident reconstruction. and did that for quite a few years. That was training and liability field were probably two of my favorites.
Yeah.
So
and then when they were
said
doing
that
away
was-
with the liability field positions, they said, well, you've got property experience. So I spent 10 years climbing roofs and going in crawl spaces and writing fire estimates. And then a friend was with the TPA. So then I started going into the public entity sector of the business, police departments, towns, and governments, doing, again, multi-line. And then over the years I've moved in, I supervise a unit of 6 now for all public entity work.
So you were saying that you spent 3,000 to 4,000 miles on the road, and you were going up
A month, yeah.
And you also talked about how this was when your kids were small. So how did you make it all work?
It always just worked, because I think being on the road, I could schedule my appointments to kind of coincide. They went to a small Catholic school. So, if I needed to be there to volunteer, for a half a day, I would just schedule my appointments accordingly. And then they got used to, if they got out of school a half a day early, Mom was picking us up and we were going out on appointments. Whether I'd get a McDonald's, sit in the car, they'd watch me do whatever I was doing. And so I think that was one of the, this was before anyone worked remote, which I did. So I haven't been in an office in over 25 years. But I think that helps with having young children. It really gave me the balance, the work-life balance that I needed.
Look, my daughters have been on many an inspection with me. There's just times that it's like, all right, well, you don't have school, or it's summer, or this is going on, and you're just going to come along. And they have interesting things to say about them. They're like, this is what you do. We don't understand, because in their mind, they're like, oh, lawyers just argue. And I was like, well, that's not really how it goes. Like, yes, we formulate arguments. Yes. But that's not totally what my job is. But it makes it work. Sometimes it feels a little awkward. Like, oh yeah, they're here for the inspection of the truck. Yeah. They'll just be sitting in the car. Don't mind them.
I know. Yeah. Just please ignore the kids in the car. Yeah. So I actually think this was a perfect career for me, at least, with children.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, my dad makes tombstones. And so it just reminded me of when I was a kid, and we'd be on a road trip and he'd have to do a detour to pull into a cemetery to go check something out. And so I guess it is all just similar, but yeah, I know, right, a little bit.
It is.
I would have rather go inspect a property, I guess, than sit in
a graveyard
or in a cemetery for it. But still, yeah, no, I mean, it's really impressive that I feel like as parents, we figure it out.
Yeah, you do it. And at that time, it didn't seem awkward to me. And, we were just talking, like I said, before we started recording, with COVID stepping in, and having to step in and do that as a parent. I guess I find it amazing that people have done it. But at the same time, I mean, you just take care of what you need to take care of, and it always seems to work out.
Yeah, it does. It does. And so, and with that, though, with COVID, it also forced a lot of our industries to evolve. So that segues into perfectly into what I was going to run into next with you. Is like, how have you witnessed the claims industry evolve over your almost 40 years?
It goes back to, like I said, starting with everyone multi-line, and all of our file notes were written on paper. And, you'd have your 2-hole punches. And, when I'd go out on my inspections, I remember going, oh my gosh, to Target, I don't know how many times a week, to pick up my developed film and put them on photo sheets and label them. And everything came through snail mail. I remember when email was just starting. And it's so funny to watch the evolving of claim systems and email and fax. And I miss those days, though. I think it was a slower, different pace. And you felt, not that I don't feel like I'm still making a difference, but I think then it was a slower pace, and I think you felt like you were doing more.
Yeah.
You didn't feel as rushed.
Mm-hmm. Well, and did you find then, like, even your claims load was less? I feel like now you have a larger claims profile to handle
Mhm.
and at a much faster speed, whereas before everything went slower and you probably had less
You
live
did.
claims.
One of the companies I worked for, the second floor was all claims and it was full. I mean,
Mhm.
you could have a unit with 10 adjusters. And the third floor was all legal. And then it started, going the other way. So I think every company is doing more with less. So not only are you doing more with less, but you brought up a good point. The pace is different because there is email, texting, the internet. So people expect a different level of service and they want it now.
Mhm.
Yes.
So you are moving at a different pace.
Yeah, and there's some parts of it that, like, it is very helpful, right? Like to have platforms that you could upload photos instantaneously and then it gets right like into your claims file, and like the processing is so much faster. But then there is just this expectation that the claims professional has to move that much faster, and sometimes you need to use brain power, right? Like this is not
Right.
like a quick service stop. Like you need to actually look at everything, evaluate everything to give it a thoughtful assessment, and you need to read the policy and figure out if it's covered, and there's a lot of things you need to do. But there's that instantaneous, like, well, I uploaded my photos yesterday, I uploaded my receipts yesterday, have you evaluated my claim, when's my check coming?
Yeah. It has changed, just reviewing an old BI demand, and I still miss that. I still miss printing that out and touching that paper and putting my strips on where I want to mark, and now you're looking at a screen and constantly trying to go back and forth to remember. And so with the involvement of the technology has also changed our risk exposure. You see a lot now, people needing cyber coverage and because of all the different risks that it's also opened up to. So different pace, and also the changes have evolved into new policy coverages and endorsements.
Well, it's also interesting being on the flip side. So I've talked about this before, but my husband and I, unfortunately, have had 3 car accidents and a tree fall on our house this year. So to go from never, ever having to file a claim to filing quite a few. And it's on an app. Like I don't even get to talk to a human.
Right.
Like throughout the entire my car accident, I did not talk to one human being. I just
really,
crazy. It was just all done on the app, everything.
And how did you feel about that? Because see, I think you lose that personal touch.
Yes, and so I mean, luckily, like at the rental car place and all the stuff, there were people, but they where to go. But everything was just like boop, because you do it all on the app. You tell them what happened, and you don't even see the money. The money goes right to went right to the collision center. So like nothing changed hands.
Yeah.
So for me, it's okay, right? But I am in my early 40s, and I've kind of been in this world where I spent the first half of my life without technology and the second half relying on it. So I'm okay with it. But I have a sister who's just 1 year older than me, and she would die if she had to do everything on an app. Like she doesn't know how to download an app.
Yeah,
so,
really?
Yeah, it's funny. And so she won't listen to this, so you don't know that I'm making fun of her. But I do think that it's like a generational divide and a generational difference, that there are a lot of people, and I'm sure there is the option to call a 1-800 number and to submit it that way and to talk to a human. But if you don't want to, you don't have to.
Yeah. And see, I'm the opposite. Somebody says, download the app. I don't want to download an app. When I call somewhere, I really want to spend time talking to an actual person. And I want to provide that same service to, my clients or my team. And it's funny to see, when we have team meetings, and I'm like, you know what? after you've gone through about the third or fourth email correspondence back and forth, it's time to pick up the phone.
Yeah.
And the younger generation does not like to do that. They want to text or do the app or continue through email. And I'm like, you lose a lot in translation. Emails and text can be misinterpreted for tone. There's no tone or, depth to them. So I try and even get the younger generations. Yeah, sometimes you still, put that personal touch on it and pick up that phone.
Yes. And I was talking to Jen about this just the other day, and I don't remember what forum I was talking about. Maybe it was on another podcast. I don't know. But I was having the same conversation with my daughter, who's 12. Jen has a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old as well. And she was having a disagreement with one of her friends over text. And I was like, look, I feel like the texting isn't working. I think you need to call her on FaceTime. She's like, well, I don't want to call her. I was like, well, but clearly you aren't resolving the conflict going back and forth on text, and there's misunderstanding. So I just feel like you should just pick up the phone and FaceTime her and talk about it that way. And there was so much resistance on her end because she was like, well, I don't want her to see me upset. I was like, I get it. But I think you both know each other's are upset. So why don't you just hash it out on the phone, and you can cut through all the misunderstanding that could be happening on text, and it's probably faster, and you'll probably resolve it, and then you'll start talking about something else and move on with your lives.
Other changes, because when we were young, we didn't have texting, and kids got mad, and they might get in a fight, or they'd walk away, and they'd have that cooling off period. And now I couldn't imagine having to be a child or raise a child in the atmosphere with social media and texting, and
it's not fun
learning interpersonal skills. I think it's missing.
It definitely is. My daughter and her friend had a misunderstanding yesterday, and the mom and I are very good friends, and we don't like to meddle, but sometimes, like, she just checked in, like, is your daughter okay? She seemed upset. And we realized that they just had a complete misunderstanding of each other. And like, my daughter thought her daughter was making fun of her, but she was making funny faces at her to make her laugh because she thought she was sad. And they just, totally missed. But she and my friend and I, we like have been coaching our kids for years. And now we watch them text each other. Like, I was doing this, like, I feel sad because I thought you were upset at me and I was doing this. And it's just so funny. We laughed that, like, we can see our words that we told our own kids so many times coming through. But if you're not, like, trying to help them and coach them and teach them without meddling, right? Like, there's like that fine line. It's really difficult because God knows what they say to each other. Now it's in text, it's in writing, it's there forever. Having kids in the age of technology is not for the faint of heart.
In fact, Jen and I had this conversation the other day. She's like, did you think that this was going to be the really hard part about parenting? I was like, no, I thought it was going to be like when they were 2 or 3. Like, I mean, not that I thought this was going to be easy, but I was like, man, I didn't think I'd be more stressed now than when I was like really worried about keeping them like alive.
And then my 12-year-old was upset the other day. She's like, it would make me feel better if you DoorDash me a Blizzard from Dairy Queen.
Yes. And that kind of translates into the claims, because these are the people who are going to be coming into the workforce. And, it's like, come on, you can't text everybody, or just, you've got to get those interpersonal skills out there working, because this business is never going away.
No, and they want everything instantaneously. I've never DoorDashed anything in my life. I was certainly not DoorDashing a 12-year-old a Blizzard at 9:00 on a Tuesday night. But they think that that's reality.
Right. And I think that makes, especially I see it on my team, I think that makes it harder for adjusters these days, because people expect that instant gratification. And, it's so funny. Last night they had, of course, I was asleep. I'm feeling much better than I was yesterday. But when I woke up, I had 4 calls from the call center. Someone wanted an immediate contact with a manager, supervisor, because a school bus had hit their car door. And
did anyone get hurt?
Kind of like, Yeah. So it's part of that. I need this done and I want it done now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, is this something that needs to be addressed? Yes. Is it
Yes.
a 3-call alarm emergency? No.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I had a list when I came in this morning of who they tried to call and what times, because they were trying everybody, because this person, wanted to talk about their claim with an adjuster right now. And of course, it's 7:00 at night. So yeah, and there are, don't get me wrong, I'm all about service, and it's like I remember I was the only property adjuster for a while, and so I was never really on vacation. And if I had to take a call on a fire, I had to take a call on a fire, and those are where somebody's lost their home. But yeah, it's very challenging in that aspect of it, the customer service.
You were the only property adjuster?
Yes, I was at a very small TPA firm, and no one knew property but me. So I had all of Indiana and Ohio. So, yeah, and a lot of school districts. So if there was it's winter and there might be a pipe burst or, a fire, tornado. Yeah. So it was.
Wow.
I'm sure you learned a whole lot of that job.
I did.
So. But also with the instantaneous, or the need for instantaneous responses, like, you need to also really build boundaries for yourself though too, because you can get caught up if you get someone calling a claim at 7 p.m. Like, can you address it then? Sure, you can, but like, you also need to have your own personal boundaries, because you need to be able to separate your home life from your work life and be like, no, like, I worked all day, I did my job, but I'm doing being me. I'm being Kay now, and I have my own stuff to do, and I can, unless it's again something that requires a immediate response. But I would say a school bus door hitting. What was it? School bus door hit, or school bus hitting their door of their cars?
Yeah, the door of the car. It's like, okay, it's drivable. We're still good, and
everyone's alive. Like, we're good.
So I feel for the teams that handle these, and again, the instant gratification. I that's what I hope can change. Because a lot of times too, the things that come up now, you sometimes don't have an answer for them right away. There's so many aspects of coverage and different. I mean, the types of claims that are turned in now. You have to go to the policy. There's just some really obscure stuff happening, which I'm sure you guys see as well.
So tell us a little though about what you're doing now, because you and I talked about it on the phone, and I think it's like super interesting, and I think you had a few things to share about it too. So let's start with what you're doing now, and we'll segue into some of the others.
Yeah, I actually have 6 team members, and like I said, we do school pools, government cities, and I have a couple adjusters who are strictly dedicated to auto and maybe some smaller injury type claims. And then I have one of my team members, she's strictly E&O and school board legal and employers legal, which are quite interesting how our school systems are operating these days.
Yes.
And then I have a couple of adjusters who are more senior level, who get, litigation, anything from police department, civil rights violations. You get a lot of pro se inmate claims, which are always written quite interesting. I'm like, you're in jail, but you can, I'm sure they have someone helping them, but you take the time and you write, and they handwrite these pro se inmate complaints, and they get the counts right. And, of course, what they're always asking for. And I'm like, that tells me you have a lot of potential. If you put this much effort into something else, you probably wouldn't be there. But and then, we have a lot of, you have slip and falls at schools, and some serious, they take the more serious auto injury things, type claims. So it's kind of, again, pretty well rounded, a lot of exposure.
Well, one thing with the pro se prison claims is one thing that it makes me think, like, made me think about that
crisis. I'm laughing, going, or their diet's not quite right. They, yeah.
Oh, is that some of the complaints?
Yeah. I need my meals kosher. They're not giving me the correct dietary, requirements. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
But I do find that is maybe a good channel of energy for someone in that situation, that they, at least they're researching and they're writing and they're expressing and they're advocating for themselves. I do think that has some positivity to it.
It does. Yeah, it does. And that's what I look at it. I look at it as positive. It's like, my gosh, you can write out this whole complaint. I'm not sure I could do it that well with my experience. And it's like, I see that. I'm like, you could really have some potential here. So
I worked for a plaintiff's firm for a little bit, and they did a lot of civil rights cases. And so I would go to the jail and meet with our client or our potential client. And they'd be like, well, while you're here, my friend wants to meet with you. And I'd get like a line out the door of all of these people. I mean, everyone would have and it's so hard parsing out what is real and what is not, right? Because there's just so much allegedly occurring there.
Yes. So yeah, again, and I always say, it's going to be, everyone's always going to need insurance. So there's always job security. But I think I like the variety that I have, because my mind needs to stay engaged and be challenged. So there's one gal on my team who, does strictly auto, and she's so good at it. And I just praise her all the time, because I'm like, I couldn't do what you do. I really couldn't. I don't have that patience anymore for the call yesterday. Gosh, there's a dent in my door. You have to fix this now. So it takes a special person in each line to do it. But I think it's the monotony. It was the monotony for me to have to deal with it.
Like not having monotony.
Yes.
Mixing it up.
When it's kind of the same thing, claim after claim after claim. It's like you kind of get on autopilot, and I don't like my brain to do that. I really want to provide that level of service and be challenged and do something. And that's what I like. Again, every 5 minutes, you might be doing something different.
I agree. I handled professional liability claims for about 6 years, and then I jumped over to GL. And everybody said, why would you ever go from professional liability? I was like, because I'm getting bored with it. I want to try something new. And GL is certainly no
cakewalk, but
no repeats. There's just so much stuff going on. Like you have so many different types of claims that would come across your desk.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I
agree. Variety is good.
Yes. Spice of life, some say. So, but what have you seen over the course of your career, though? How have you seen things change as to how cases are litigated, and like how they're approached by either the claimants or the attorneys? Like, have you seen a change in that?
Oh, yes. I mean, we're in a more litigious society, as I'm sure you're aware. And I find it kind of sad because, again, I got into this and I have that servant's heart. So the best aspect of this job is when somebody sends you that email, I so appreciate your help. There was a lady, this is a story, I may deviate off, but
go ahead.
She was a slip and fall. Little old lady, and we did, and I met with her, and they have the best stories, and I was probably there for a couple of hours, really spent the time talking to her, and she was getting ready to go over to and do an Italy tour. And, thinking I enjoyed our conversation, never thought I'd see her. And she called me when she got back and she's like, "Are you going to be out in this area? Can you stop by?" And I said, I can. And so she had gone to Italy or Rome. When she was in Rome, she saw the Pope was in, and we talked about faith, and she got me this rosary that he had blessed that's made out of rose petals.
Wow.
And to this day,
thoughtful.
I don't even know how many years ago this was, but it's got his picture, but I have taken, you can see I've taped it up. This thing has traveled with me wherever I went, to any job. And it sits there as a reminder of what you can do for someone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That the appreciation that they show.
Yes.
I think we're losing a lot of that because our society's getting to a point where it always has to be someone else's fault. And I'm owed money for it.
Yes. Yeah.
And there are times, when things have to be litigated. I am not saying there aren't some companies out there who push people towards that, but it's very disheartening to see that happening. And, I was on your property. You own my medical bills. Well, what if you'd fallen at home? What would, trying to get that across that it's not that I don't want to pay you, but legal liability. We kind of go back to insurance 101.
Yes.
So yeah, there are, I think that's being missed, really wanting to help someone, but then you have the people who.
Yeah.
Well, oh gosh, my watch was listening to me. I don't know. So yeah, I think it's a big change that I hate, that you'd hate to see. And then, those would probably be the people who are going to complain about how high their rates are. And it's like,
Well, I love that you mentioned though that gift, because sometimes this industry can be really hard in the sense that you don't know if you're actually helping anyone or if they're seeing the help that you're providing, because it can get lost and it can get gritty at times.
Yes.
And many years ago, I was defending a claim for this nonprofit group, and it was a bad case in the sense that it was really, really sad. These two young boys drowned in a creek, and they went there to jump off a bridge because the creek was high and it was like a rite of passage. And the nonprofit that I was representing, they like basically picked up the trash in this park. So their job was just to beautify it, and they got brought into this terrible, terrible lawsuit, and I was able to get them out because they really had no liability because their job was it was a neighborhood association that they would have like weekend volunteers to like go around and pick up any of the trash. So nothing to do with ensuring that children don't go jumping off a bridge. And I got them out of it, and I got this handwritten thank you note from the director of the association. And it was the first time I've ever gotten anything like that. And, it just reminded me that what we're doing does go noticed. I mean, sometimes it goes unnoticed, of course, like as all things do, especially as parents, a lot of the good things we do go unnoticed. But I still have that note to this day. I every job I put it on my cork board because it's just a reminder of like what we really are here to help, and to resolve, and it just is a reminder, like this affects both sides too.
Yes,
there's people on both sides.
Yeah, I mean that's what my goal has always been, is getting them back. My goal is to get you back to where you were before this loss. But yeah, that is just, that was probably one of the most special things. I mean, it's just like, I still, I think of her. I'm sure she's no longer with us, bless her heart. But apparently I made a difference in her life. She made a difference in mine.
She certainly did, right?
Yeah. And just being able to touch someone in that way and be there at their worst time and get them out. And I think that should still always be
The goal.
the motivating factor.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw a post on LinkedIn, I think yesterday or the day before, and it was by someone who was a plaintiff in a lawsuit. Their husband had been injured somehow, and whether it was a defense verdict or just not the verdict that they wanted, she put up a scathing post just about how, defense counsel was clearly lying the whole time and was getting evidence that wasn't real because they were hired by an insurance company. Insurance companies are terrible and they just don't want to help him. And it was just, I feel like that is so many people's perception.
Yeah.
It is.
I think it goes back to what you were saying, is that, somebody was injured and they think that they're owed millions of dollars because they were injured. Yes. But I mean, in this case, it seems as if a jury didn't side with them, if the jury, but I mean, they said it must have been that the other side was lying, or it must have been that they were, twisting the facts. But unfortunately, it's like, just, insurance is there, like you said, to make somebody whole, to bring them back to where they were before whatever happened. So it's just awful that, there's people like this woman who you touched her life so greatly that she thought of you while she was on vacation.
Yes.
Yeah. And then there's somebody who said, well, there's an insurance company that can't be trusted. Right. There's just the two ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. And that was one of the advantages of being in the field and meeting with people. And, I would hear that a lot. You're the insurance company. You don't want to pay. And I'd always go, you know what? I'd love to pay you. Again, if it's on one side, if you're legally obligated, if I owed this, I would love to pay you. It's much easier. And, even on the first party side, it's much easier for me to pay a claim than it is to deny it. Do you know how much more work is in denying a claim? And it's not my money. I don't care. I'd love to pay you and have you be happy and go on your way. But if I can't document my file as to if there's damage or, liability, I can't pay you. So sometimes you would see the wheels turn. But I always tried to leave with them having a better perception than when I first arrived.
Right.
That's what I tried to do. So at least I always know in my career, I've always done the right thing.
Right.
It may not have made everybody happy at the time, but if you're looking in this world to make people happy 100% of the time, you're going to be sorely disappointed.
Yes, because no one is ever happy all the time.
Yeah.
So, but in your time, you've had to work a lot with outside counsel, both on defense and plaintiff side, and we have a lot of attorneys who listen to this podcast, and what are some of the things you see with your own counsel, with defense counsel, that are things that you love or you praise, and then some other things that you're like, oh, why did they do this? Like, what are some tips and pointers out there for our attorneys who are listening and like, okay, tell us.
I know. And I know you guys, I think, on our side of it, I myself personally have always found a little frustrating that, okay, what are our chances I'm getting out on a motion to dismiss or a motion for summary judgment? And I know as attorneys, ethically, it just bothered me. I've never got 100%. I mean, usually, I don't know if there's a class. Oh, we're at 60 or 70% on that, and so. But most of the defense counsel that I've worked with, if we want to stay on defense, I've never had really a problem getting what I need. But I think sometimes they're in the same boat that we are, in that they're handling a lot more with less. So their time is valuable. So just following up on, where's your initial analysis? Where's, your budget? I need an answer to that complaint. But rarely does that happen on, the defense side.
Yeah.
Plaintiffs' counsel are an interesting breed. I know, Jen, you said you were a plaintiff attorney, but I wish there was a better relationship. Most of them, especially the ones that advertise and send mailers, and I don't know why it's so secretive through the life of the claim. Like, I'm not going to tell you anything about their injury or and until I'll send the demand package. And it's like, especially now with the Medicare out there, give us we need name, social security number, address, date of birth. Because if you're going to get down and of course, when you send your demand, you've ignored me for 2 years. You send your demand and you want me to review it within 14 days and have an offer out to you. And we've got somebody that's Medicare eligible. I've been telling you for 2 years to get Medicare information takes 60 to 90 days.
Right.
And no longer is the wording, we'll take care of everything, all lanes. We're not speaking that anymore for Medicare because some of these plaintiff firms don't pay the lane and they can close shop
and then the insurance company's on the hook for it.
And then we're on the I just, I wish there was some more communication that plaintiff attorneys didn't feel like we were adversaries, because we just want to get a file off our desk. We just want to have the right evaluation of it each step of the way and have, we don't want to have a file sitting at a $50,000 reserve and then all of a sudden we get the demand package in and they've got $200,000 in medical bills.
Right.
And,
I didn't enjoy doing plaintiff's work. I feel like I couldn't get my defense hat off.
Yeah.
Like it was just always, and the one case, it had been sitting with the office for years and they couldn't settle it. And it was a low value case. I mean, it was like limited tort, auto accident, barely anything. So finally I called the adjuster and I said, look, I'm sure you want to get this closed. I said, can you tell me your authority? And he told me, and I said, I will settle it for $1,000 less than your authority. You don't have to go to your supervisor if you can close it today. He's like, absolutely, send over the paperwork now. And my boss was shocked. He's like, how did you get that settled for that much money? I said, because he just wanted it off his desk. It meant nothing.
You picked up the phone.
Yes, and I picked up the phone and called, and we had a discussion.
An email that could get lost, or it's another email. I'll look at that later. See what I mean? That's part of the relationship aspect of the business.
But I think it goes back to what you were saying too, with like plaintiffs have an unrealistic expectation of what their claims are worth. And if you don't have a plaintiff's attorney who can bring them down to reality, it's never going to settle because they're still waiting for like that pie in the sky number that's just never going to happen.
Yeah.
Because my friend's cousin's boyfriend's sister told me that
got this
$2, right?
And too is the adjuster explaining that process. So going back to, I always, ask defense counsel if, we're really far apart. Is this a plaintiff attorney issue or a client issue? Who's setting the expectations? But, one thing that when I was handling claims and, people would call me to settle their BI and I'd evaluate it. And they're like, well, I should get 3 times my medical bills. And I said, let me tell you a story. Let's say someone falls and breaks their arm. They go to the emergency room. They have a couple follow-ups with their primary care physician and 10 PT visits. Someone else falls, they strain their back, they go to the emergency room, they have a couple primary care physician visits and some PT. Now I've got the same medical bills, but these 2 injuries are quite different. So I can't evaluate. It's not an evaluation based on the medical bills. I have to go by what's in the records and the type of injury. And some people would take that in, others would not.
Yeah. So, and of course the medical bills are a factor, right? Yeah. But like not all the 2 injuries are not the same. Yes. And I think that's like an old school thing too. I remember when I first started practicing, people were still using that typical formula. And as a young attorney, that was like, I followed it too, because that's what someone told me, right? That's what I was taught. And then as I became more experienced, I realized, wait
a minute.
This doesn't make much sense. And because then you also realize, not all bills are the same, like you might have a bill of X because they were seeing some chiropractor who doesn't have covered by insurance. So then all the bills can be posted and then nothing gets reduced. And like, there's all these nuances that I then learned as I became more experienced that, it's not, apples to apples.
Right. And that's you're compared to apples to oranges, or
Yeah.
So I know something that we haven't touched on, and I'm sure, I don't know if you guys are seeing this. It's I do have someone on my team too who does our sexual misconduct claims.
Mhm.
So those are really kind of a
Yes.
trend now that they've extended the statute on those for minors who, are now coming and saying, whether it had been, happened at a school or church or whatever. Those are really becoming an issue in the arena.
Yes.
And you're seeing big dollar verdicts on them. And I think that's our jury system is a little awkward, because I'm sure, as you know, you're always looking at your venue to determine, gosh, do we pay a little more on this? Because you don't want to go to a jury on this. But letting someone play with monopoly money on these civil cases is kind of dangerous, I think.
Yeah. And those, I mean, I've worked on a lot of sexual assault claims, and I always find them to be, the valuation be very, very difficult. Like that, I think, is the hardest part, because it's so much on emotional and psychological damages. But then I also found that depending on who you talk to, they will have a very different view of the value, because some people would be like, well, it was only one time that they were, and I was like, well, but at the same time, like, but that one time could have caused a lot of mental damage. But like, I when I first started handling them, that I remember going to one of the partners on the claim and talking about it, and we had just had very different views, because I was like, yeah, but like this happened and this was very traumatic, but they had a very different view of it. So that if that happened in our office with people who handle these claims regularly, you put it in front of a jury, you have no idea what they're going to come up with, and you don't know what kind of baggage they're coming with as well. That's going to influence all of that.
Well, and kind of going back to evaluating, like when I worked a lot of fatalities, and that's a hard thing to step out of. You have to step aside and put your personal feelings aside. So, when you're looking at a claim for a child who is now deceased versus an adult, and, it's hard to put a number on the life of anyone. But, in my experience, it was like, people always get nervous when it's a child. And I'm like, yeah, but I kind of look at it as, I think a claim that has a young 20s, someone in their 20s who's married, has a child, I just think that that's the value on that, because they're actually supporting a family. And I know when looking at the mom and dad, is this anything you're going to ever get over? So that's kind of it can kind of mess with you too, when you actually have to sit there and go, how am I going to value this? Because you're not being callous. You're not trying to be callous or unsympathetic, but you have to take that hat off for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to look at it very objectively.
Yes.
Which is hard, especially when we started this podcast talking about how you need to have compassion.
Yes.
And we're ending it saying, take the compassion, throw it out the window for that one time.
This reminds me of, so back, I used to live in Hartford, Connecticut, and we had a really bad snowstorm in October the one year, and everyone lost their power and for like a week. But for some reason, my block came on 2 days later. So I kept inviting everybody over for dinner every night, and whoever wanted to take a shower, do the laundry, whatever. And I was working in claims for an insurance company, and my husband was in residency. So we would get a table full of doctors and claims professionals who didn't know each other sitting at the table every night. And we would talk about the claims that we handled that day. And somebody was like, all right, somebody lost 2 fingers. And I'm like, well, what fingers are they? Okay, these two. What did he do?
Thumb's worth more. Yeah.
And they're like, how much, would you value if you only had 3 fingers? And finally, the one surgeon looked over and he's like, do you guys sit and talk about this like every day? We're like, yeah, this is our job. This is what we do. But I just remember the look of like, on his face, like, really? Like, this is your job, valuing what your life would be like, if you lost 2 fingers, or if you, lost a foot, or, hurt your back. But yeah, that's our job. And trying to gauge it from the general public, like what would that be to you?
But what would you do with it? And well, it almost goes back to too, when I was in a training position, I created a bodily injury evaluation class. And it was so funny, I'd take real files, black out some of the information, but I'd have everyone evaluate what they thought the claim was worth. And it was so funny that the newer adjusters had there was a big difference in value, but the newer adjusters, their values were so much lower than a more experienced adjuster. So I'd ask them at the end, why did you come up with the value? Well, newer adjusters were afraid to spend too much. Experienced adjusters knew how much time it was going to take them to keep working that file. And if they could pay that extra $5,000 to get this off their desk, they would do it in a second. And it wasn't going like anything outside the realm, but it was funny to watch how your mind changes after you've been in this business a while. You know what your time is worth and how much am I going to have to spend on this? And am I going to pay a few thousand more to get this one done?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I did yesterday at a pre-suit mediation, and the mediator asked, she's like, well, will you show the documents the other side? And I said, well, of course I'll show the documents the other side. I'm going to have to produce them in discovery if they file suit. So yeah, I need to give them to her now. It's going to save money. And if we could settle the case before suit's filed, excellent. And we ended up settling for a lot less than I thought, but it was because we were willing to give her our evidence right up front, because why wouldn't you?
Yes. Yeah.
And we do a lot now too with, plaintiff attorneys, I'm sure their client isn't telling them the whole story, but there's so much video out there now, which is actually one of the pluses, when we talked, going back to talking about all the technology, video is great. So a lot of times we send this over to the plaintiff attorney and go, here, check out this video, but so that's actually helped. But some companies don't want to turn that video over. And I'm like, they're going to get it in discovery. Why not cut this off now? Here's why I'm making my decision, the decision that I am.
Yeah, especially if it's going to help get it done. And look, if the video is super hurtful for you, then maybe you don't hand over the video and you just have to put some more money on it and just get it resolved. Because if they see a bad video, then they're like, wait, I don't want to settle this early, video is priceless.
Yes, video is, and people don't realize, you don't have the slip and falls in the grocery stores like you used to, or somebody throws something down. It's like, because I think they know Big Brother is watching.
Yes. Yeah. And Jen, I wanted to comment on this. So, about your dinners, that I feel like that is such a valuable resource for all these claims adjusters to be like, if someone has some injury and you have a bunch of doctors, you're like, explain this to me. What is this? Especially with something you haven't seen before, or even just with fractures, like having someone in the field explain like why this fracture is worse than that fracture. Cause it took me years to figure that out on my own. But you have a bunch of residents in the room, very helpful.
And do you guys find that people will, once they find out what you do, and whether you're on defense or plaintiff side, that people do like to pick your brain? And I think that extends my job outside of what I do. I really want to educate people on, come on now, we're
absolutely
in the same spot.
Absolutely. People always will ask about, can I have your advice on this? Or what do you think about this? Can you value, what do you value this at? And it is super helpful having my husband whenever I have any kind of case with medical, if I have any medical questions. It's so nice to have him as a resource. Or, obviously we have now a lot of friends in the medical community because of him. So that really is, it's a free added bonus.
Yeah. Yeah. Unlike when some come to me, and I'm sure Jen, you have the same experience. Like they're like, "Oh, you're a lawyer. Like, so what do you know about this contract?" I'm like, "Is there a risk transfer opportunity in that contract? Otherwise,
All I know is I'm going to go to the I'm going to go to whose duties are what, and then I'm going to go to the insurance clause.
Yes, yeah. What's the scope of work? I can work with that, but like you want that's not what I or someone asked me recently about licensing, and I was like, I don't do licensing. I'm like, and I can't even pretend. Like, you got to find someone else how to do that.
Well, between the two of us, the amount of phone calls we get from people with medical and legal questions, it is. I wish I could charge.
I do, but don't you feel like I try and help them understand, what they're doing. This is how these work. This works, because I think our industry. What I'm doing now, I don't do, I'm not with the $1 insurance company. I'm with the TPA. So we have pretty high SIRs. So they're fairly conscious on how that's spent. And, but, working from a $1, I kind of felt it was also my duty to, make them not see insurance companies in a bad light. Like sometimes I go out on property. I'm like, gosh, your coverage B, other structures, you've got a nice, they had built a 3-car detached garage or hobby shop. And I'm like, your coverage B is only at $10,000. Could you replace that building if it burned down to the ground? And they'd go, so being actually proactive, but educating when you could, because I think we're heading in the wrong direction. Premiums are going up, companies are pulling out of areas. We'll use Florida and California, for example, because of the things that are happening. And, COVID, parts prices have gone up, labor rates have gone up. So, of course, the cost for vehicles, the cost to repair vehicles. So we're all paying for that in some way. Yes. And so I really do like to educate, so that they see that this is all a big pool we're kind of sharing.
Yes. So there's a local nonprofit here that has a group of women who they are trying to help educate and help these women be able to live on their own and support their families on their own. And at the end, they go through a series of classes and trainings. And then at the end, the nonprofit will put I think it's like $5,000 or $7,000 in their bank account to start them out to try to do things. Yeah, and so they ask professional women to come in and give them, like, my cousin's a real estate agent, and she went in and talked to them about like apartment leases, or if you're going to buy a house, what are the steps? And so they asked me if I wanted to do a class. And I said, I would love to talk to them about insurance, like to talk to them, what insurance do you need? What kind of limits do you need? All this. The day before I was supposed to present, they sent me an email, and the topic of conversation was how to buy a car with Jen.
Oh.
And so I was like, how to buy a car? I was like, I wanted to talk to them about like what limits they needed on their insurance, and like how to buy, why you need apartment insurance, and like rental insurance, not about how to buy a car. And so I missed my opportunity on teaching people how to get proper insurance. But I tried.
Yeah, you did try. Valiant effort.
Because, things keep going the way they're going. I mean, traditional insurance is going to be priced out for a lot of people, and you can't do without it. So it's going to, I think it's going to take all of us to kind of streamline and understand where things are going, and do what we can to help the industry.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, people don't also understand the coverage they're buying and the limits that they're buying, and then they get into an accident. Yeah. So why isn't any of this? Why do I have such a low limit? And it's like, well, that's what you purchased, but you just didn't know.
Yeah. And then, if there was one where we had the limit, and low limited, bought state minimum, and then rarely, it doesn't happen often, but when you run your assets check to see if you're going to let them, accept the limits. This guy owned a house. He had over $1 million in his investments. And I'm like, oh, dude, this is all you purchased state minimum. And it was, it was a pretty serious loss. So, when you see those commercials, I don't know if it's the Progressive or whoever, name your price. And it's like, don't name your price because you might not have the right coverages. And I don't want to be the one to come out and tell you I can't hear. Again, going back to the other structures, I don't want to have to come out here when that burns down and hand you a check for $10,000 and be on my way.
Right. Well, Kay, we are just about out of time, but I loved having you on, and I can't let you go before I ask you this. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self?
I think I would have told myself just to be a little easier on myself as I went through the process.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get there. It's ever changing. And luckily I ended up where I was supposed to be. I believe most people do. But I wish I would have taken the time to enjoy a little bit more than I did.
Yeah.
And go a little slower.
Yeah. I think that's always really good advice. It's hard to slow down when you're going through it, because then you're like, look back and you're like, oh, I missed. I just.
Yeah.
What is the Ferris Bueller quote? I forget.
Yeah.
If you don't stop and look around a while, life will pass you by, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And I don't have any regret. I don't think, I have any regrets in any, as I've made this journey. I think I've done a lot of good, which I'm proud about. And I think this is where I was supposed to be, but you almost wish, gosh, I wish I could have done, spent more time with this person on that. But yeah, you don't realize what you're going to miss. So try and, as busy as it is to adjusters, as you're getting off the phone or reading that email or listening, if you have a difficult person on the phone, I always say, to survive in this business, you need two of the most important things are you need to be able to adapt to changes, because it's going to change every day. Mm-hmm. And you cannot take this personally.
Right.
Because when that person comes to you or comes at you or is yelling at you, it's not you as a person they're yelling at. So that'd probably be the best advice I could give. Slow down, enjoy the moment, and it's never personal.
Yeah, stop.
Because you're not going to survive in this business if you take all this personally.
No. Even though there's times that I do.
I know. You still do. You still, sometimes you do. You hang up that phone and could I have done that differently? But no, and yeah.
Yeah. There's many a day I call Jen and I'm like, or she'll call me and like, people get under your skin,
Yes.
or they.
And that's when you walk away for a moment. So,
yes.
But you can't get into that. Don't get into that back and forth. Just keep it professional. This isn't personal. You have to say a little prayer for them under your breath, because they're apparently having a bad day. If something like this has gotten them to that point. So.
Well, Kay, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, for our listeners out there, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to Claims Never Sleep. You can find us on your favorite streaming platform, and you can also find us on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Meghan Henry.